Imagine, if you will, walking into a tightly packed underground Texas club in the mid-1980s. The air is thick with humidity and cheap perfume, and the music is absolutely blasting. We are talking about Jerry Lee Lewis's Great Balls of Fire, shaking the floorboards so hard you can feel the vibrations in your very teeth. The crowd is in an absolute frenzy, screaming and cheering. Suddenly, out into the center of the room struts a male dancer. But he is not performing a standard routine. This man is wearing a jockstrap that has been meticulously soaked in lighter fluid. With a dramatic flourish, he sets it completely ablaze. It is a moment of pure, dangerous kinetic energy, a visual of profound chaos that borders on the surreal. But here is the real hook. Sitting in the back of that very club, nursing a drink in the shadows, is a young graduate student. He is quietly watching the physics of the flame, analyzing the movement of the dancer, and he is genuinely, seriously contemplating whether he should abandon his incredibly grueling academic path, march backstage, and become a flaming jockstrap male stripper himself. He desperately needs the money to pay for his tuition, and that fiery stage seems a whole lot more lucrative than sitting isolated in a library. The stakes of that specific career pivot are monumental, because that young graduate student, sitting in the dark, deciding between the lucrative chaos of exotic dancing and the cold isolation of academia, eventually chose to put away the lighter fluid and tutor math instead. That single, highly combustible pragmatic decision allowed him to grow up to become the single most famous, culturally ubiquitous astrophysicist in the world. A man who went from contemplating a Texas nightclub stage to standing as the director of the Hayden Planetarium in New York City. Today, we are breaking down the universe of Neil deGrasse Tyson. Welcome to Legendary Lives Unveiled. If you are ready to strip away the memified TV personas and uncover the hidden, multi-dimensional, and often highly controversial corners of history's greatest minds, hit that like button, subscribe, and join us on this deep dive. To understand the architecture of his resilience, we must completely obliterate the cultural archetype of the frail, hunchbacked theoretical physicist living purely in the abstract realm of mathematics. Born in Manhattan in 1958 and raised in the Bronx, Tyson was a serious, competitive athlete from a very young age. While he was up on the roof of the Skyview Apartments, intensely studying lunar craters through binoculars, he was simultaneously serving as the captain of the wrestling team at the fiercely competitive Bronx High School of Science. Wrestling is a sport entirely predicated on applied physics, the absolute mastery of leverage, center of mass, and dynamic friction. He took that hyper-awareness of gravity and moved on to his undergraduate studies at Harvard University, where he pushed his physical boundaries even further by joining the rowing team. He rowed crew on the grueling, brutal waters of the Charles River, perfectly synchronizing his biomechanics with 7 other people and pushing his cardiovascular system to the point of collapse in the freezing dark. And while managing the staggering cognitive load of a Harvard astrophysics curriculum, he also began studying ballet, jazz, and Afro-Caribbean dance. Later, while pursuing his PhD at the University of Texas at Austin, around the exact same time as that infamous nightclub incident, he joined the university's official dance team. In 1985, this theoretical physics PhD student won a gold medal at a national tournament in the extraordinarily technical International Latin Ballroom style. He mastered explosive energy, profound rhythmic timing, and the real-time negotiation with angular momentum and inertia. This was not a contradiction. It was the fundamental mechanism of his unparalleled ability to communicate science to the masses. Standing 6'2", with a massive physical frame and hands large enough to palm a basketball, he utilizes what performers call kinetic empathy. He does not stand rigidly behind a podium reading from a teleprompter. He paces, commanding the spatial geography of the room, dropping his voice into a booming baritone register, and using his hands to visually sculpt the concept of a collapsing star in thin air. The James Bond of the science world brings the infinite cold abstraction of the universe down to earth by literally embodying it. Yet, while he chose to defy the physical expectations of academia, he was simultaneously forced into a daily, exhausting confrontation with the intense prejudices tied to his race. Growing up in the Bronx during the 1960s and 70s, a profoundly complex era marked by the concurrent triumph of the Apollo missions and severe urban redlining, the societal expectations for a young black boy were suffocatingly narrow. As he detailed in his autobiography, "The Sky is Not the Limit," carrying books and speaking passionately about the cosmos did not garner respect on the streets of New York City. His intellectual curiosity was fiercely protected within his home by his mother, a gerontologist, and his father, a sociologist who served as the Human Resources Commissioner for the city under Mayor John Lindsay. But outside that fortress, the hostility was active and visceral. Even after establishing himself as a highly educated scientist, he endured suspicious police officers, stopping and interrogating him for simply walking down the street carrying his own telescope equipment. Wary shop owners shadowed him down aisles, and cabbies in Manhattan rolled up their windows, refusing to pick him up late at night. Perhaps even more insidious was the polite, velvet-covered prejudice of high society, where cocktail party bores assumed a black man in a suit was less intelligent or less law-abiding simply because of his melanin. Completely unable to fathom he was the astrophysicist in the room, this specific friction birthed one of his most profound psychological frameworks, the concept of the social tax. He aggressively rejects the word burden. A burden is a boulder tied to your back, designed to crush your spine and destroy you. A tax is simply an administrative reality, an incredibly unfair, deeply frustrating toll that you pay, get your receipt for, and keep walking toward the laboratory. He refuses to let emotional victimhood bankrupt his cognitive energy. He compares this prejudice to atmospheric drag on a rocket. The rocket does not complain about the friction. Engineers simply calculate the drag coefficient, build a stronger engine, and push through the heat until they reach the vacuum of space. This lived experience actually made him hypervigilant against bad science. In his 2022 book, Starry Messenger, he dedicates a rigorous section to dismantling the deeply racist history of anthropology, pointing out how flawed, biased methodologies were used for centuries by European and American scientists to justify racial hierarchy. He understands perfectly that when social conditioning overrides empirical observation, the result is dangerous propaganda disguised as truth. That unyielding resilience directly set the stage for an almost mythological moment in December of 1975. Tyson was a 17-year-old high school senior, already so advanced he was giving astronomy lectures to adults in New York. His college application was so overwhelmingly impressive that the admissions office at Cornell University flagged it and passed it directly to the most famous scientist on the planet, Carl Sagan. By 1975, Sagan was a titan, director of the Laboratory for Planetary Studies at Cornell, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, and the visionary behind the upcoming 1980 Cosmos series. Sagan personally wrote to the teenager from the Bronx, inviting him to visit the campus in Ithaca. On a snowy Saturday, Sagan took hours out of his day to give this kid a personal tour of his laboratories. As a massive snowstorm hit, Sagan wrote down his home phone number, telling the young student to call and stay with his family if the bus was grounded. Before Tyson left, Sagan pulled a copy of his own book, The Cosmic Connection, from the shelf and inscribed it with a prophetic message. The reigning king of astrophysics was formally anointing his successor, and what did the 17-year-old do? He survived the bus ride home, looked at this incredible, life-changing offer from a living legend, and rejected Cornell. He chose to enroll at Harvard University instead. This stunning, deeply counterintuitive decision was not driven by arrogance. It was a cold, objective calculation. He had carefully evaluated the undergraduate astrophysics curriculums and determined that Harvard's specific academic structure and larger department size better suited his foundational educational needs. He completely separated the emotional weight of Sagan's legendary gesture from the data of the curriculum. Yet, he internalized Sagan's fundamental ethos, the solemn duty to treat any inquiring student with ultimate dignity, seeing them not as a demographic, but as a fellow citizen of the cosmos. He accepted the torch of science communication, but he recognized that he did not have to attend Sagan's university to carry it. He wielded it in his own fiercely independent, highly rigorous, and sometimes completely ruthless manner. That exact ruthless independence led him to systematically dismantle the solar system, becoming the man who murdered a beloved planet. It is the year 2000. Tyson is serving as the director of the Hayden Planetarium, overseeing the opening of the spectacular, newly constructed $210 million Rose Center for Earth and Space in New York. Tasked with dictating how the physical models of the solar system will be displayed, he looks at the data and decides to completely blow up the traditional 9-planet lineup. He groups the rocky terrestrial planets together, then the massive gas giants, and Pluto, the universally beloved 9th planet discovered in 1930, he completely removes it from the planetary display, quietly lumping it into a new exhibit of icy debris called the Kuiper Belt. He essentially executed a unilateral demotion 6 full years before the International Astronomical Union officially voted to reclassify Pluto as a dwarf planet in 2006. The scientific logic was bulletproof. Pluto is tiny, actually smaller than our own moon. It lacks hydrostatic equilibrium and has failed to clear its neighborhood, traveling in a highly eccentric, messy oval that actually crosses the orbit of Neptune. With the discovery of dozens of other icy bodies like Eris in the outer edges of the solar system, admitting Pluto meant logically admitting dozens, perhaps hundreds, of icy chunks into the planetary club. But the public reaction was an absolute national meltdown. The New York Times ran a front-page article with the headline, "Pluto's not a planet, only in New York." Tyson received mountains of angry hate mail from third graders. He even published a book chronicling the outrage titled The Plutophiles, The Rise and Fall of America's Favorite Planet. The public anthropomorphized a frozen rock, projecting their own feelings of being marginalized onto Pluto, viewing this data-driven reorganization as a personal attack on their childhood nostalgia. But his pedantic crusade for absolute accuracy did not stop with museum exhibits and children's tears. He took this obsession straight to the highest levels of Hollywood. Sitting down to watch James Cameron's 1997 cultural juggernaut, Titanic, we reach the emotional climax of the film. The ship has sunk. Kate Winslet's character, Rose, is floating on a piece of debris in the freezing Atlantic on the morning of April 15, 1912, staring up at the night sky, waiting for rescue. While most people are weeping, Tyson is looking at the background. He realizes the star field displayed on the screen is completely factually wrong. The visual effects team had literally taken a fake sky, copied it, and pasted it in reverse to fill the screen. A mirror image. He wrote a highly detailed letter to James Cameron, explaining the mechanics of precession and the exact celestial map that should have been visible on that specific date. Cameron ignored it, so Tyson brought it up in interviews and cornered Cameron at events for over a decade. Finally, for the 2012 3D re-release of the film, Cameron yielded to the pressure. He asked for the correct astronomical map and spent the money to execute a post-production visual effects fix. To a scientist, spending millions of dollars to perfectly replicate the carpet patterns and the china of the Titanic, but carelessly throwing a mirrored, impossible sky into the background, implies that the universe is just a cheap theatrical backdrop. If you allow millions of people to subconsciously absorb an impossible star field, you are contributing to a degradation of scientific truth. But elevating yourself to the position of a highly visible public intellectual turns you into a massive lightning rod. And as we are about to see, the universe he studies is defined by cold, clean math and predictable orbits. But the earthly realm he actually operates in is infinitely messy, painfully human, and filled with a dark matter that threatened to permanently unravel his entire legacy. We return to the dark matter because elevating yourself to the position of a highly visible public intellectual, a definitive science guy who consults on DC Comics, calculates the exact location of Krypton's red sun in Action Comics, and amasses millions of followers, turns you into a massive lightning rod. That exact same unyielding demand for objective truth that forced Hollywood to redraw the stars placed him on a direct collision course with deeply entrenched academic disciplines, powerful religious institutions, and eventually, a profoundly severe public reckoning. This is where the pristine equations of the cosmos clash violently with the messy ideologies of Earth. It began with the academic friction. He publicly, and quite bluntly, dismissed the entire field of philosophy as essentially useless. In interviews, he argued that philosophers spend far too much time asking meaningless questions about the nature of meaning itself, rather than gathering actual physical data. For a man who calculates the mass of invisible dark matter, if a concept cannot be measured mathematically or tested in a laboratory, debating its theoretical validity is merely a distraction. The backlash from the academic community was massive and sustained. Philosophers and ethicists labeled him a Philistine. They accused him of demonstrating a fundamental ignorance of epistemology, the very study of how we know what we know. His attitude was likened to a construction engineer, looking at a group of architects endlessly arguing over the font choice on a blueprint, while he is the one actually trying to pour the concrete and build the house. But the philosophers fired back with a stark warning. Without the foundational logic and ethical frameworks provided by philosophy, the scientific method itself has no grounding. Philosophy, they argued, is required to ask why we are building the house, and whether the house should be built at all. But that intellectual friction pales in comparison to his second major collision. In 2014, he took on the monumental task of hosting the reboot of Carl Sagan's legendary documentary series, Cosmos, A Space-Time Odyssey. Right out of the gate, in the very first episode, he chose to tell the historical story of Giordano Bruno, a Renaissance-era Italian philosopher and friar who proposed that the universe was boundless and contained infinite suns. For this heresy, Bruno was burned at the stake by the Catholic Church. The inclusion of that specific narrative provoked a swift, aggressive reaction. The Catholic League heavily criticized the show, claiming it deliberately smeared Catholicism. They argued that the series skipped over far more consequential, rigorously scientific figures like Copernicus and Galileo, choosing instead to elevate a mystical theologian just to push a simplistic, antagonistic, religion versus science narrative. The pushback bled rapidly into fundamentalist Christian groups. They strongly criticized the series because its detailed, visually stunning explorations of the Big Bang, the mechanics of biological evolution, and the timeline of the cosmic calendar directly and unapologetically contradicted the literal Genesis creation narrative. He had become a volatile target in the culture wars. He was operating with an uncompromising evangelical rationalism. He was preaching the gospel of objective data, Consider Episode 7 of Cosmos. He spends an entire hour detailing the work of geochemist Claire Patterson. He meticulously explains how Patterson used the decay rate of lead isotopes found in fragments of ancient meteorites to definitively calculate the age of the Earth at 4.5 billion years. Because uranium decays into lead at a mathematically constant half-life, measuring the ratio of those elements in space rocks provides an irrefutable, objective clock. When he presents that 4.5 billion year timeline, he is not merely reciting a number from a textbook. To an individual whose entire identity, community, and moral framework is built upon the belief in a 6,000-year-old Earth, he isn't just teaching geology. He is actively dismantling their worldview. His fundamental assertion is that the universe is under no obligation to align with human theology. In a modern society, where personal belief is so frequently conflated with core identity, stating an objective fact that contradicts a deeply held belief is almost always perceived as a hostile, personal attack, which transitions us to the third and undoubtedly most serious area of controversy. The friction here was not philosophical. It was intensely, painfully personal. In late 2018, the cultural conversation surrounding him shifted dramatically. 4 different women came forward to publicly accuse him of varying degrees of sexual misconduct. The allegations spanned a wide timeline and ranged from inappropriate comments and unwanted physical touching in professional settings to a highly severe accusation of rape. Dating back to their time in graduate school in the 1980s, the fallout was instantaneous. It created an immediate, profound crisis for his carefully curated public image. Major television networks, including Fox and National Geographic, immediately suspended production and pulled his highly rated shows, Cosmos and Star Talk, off the airwaves. They initiated a comprehensive, independent investigation into the claims. He published a lengthy statement publicly denying the accusation of assault. However, he offered his own context and apologies for some of the other interactions, claiming his naturally exuberant, physically expressive nature, the very kinetic empathy that made him famous, was tragically misunderstood. The investigations were conducted behind closed doors over several months. In the summer of 2019, the networks released a brief statement announcing that the investigation had concluded. They allowed him to retain his positions and return to television. They did not release the specific findings or the details of the internal review. Analyzing this forces us to confront the incredibly messy reality of modern public figures. We possess a deep-seated psychological desire for our heroes, particularly those who explain the pristine, elegant laws of nature, to be morally immaculate. We want the men who map the stars to be perfect. When a figure of his stature is implicated in such complex, painful human controversies, it shatters the illusion. It forces the public into an uncomfortable cognitive dissonance. The universe he studies is defined by cold, clean math and predictable orbits. But the earthly realm he actually operates in is infinitely messy, deeply flawed, and painfully human. You simply cannot calculate the trajectory of human behavior the way you calculate the trajectory of a comet. Perhaps this is the underlying psychological reason why he constantly, almost obsessively, attempts to pull humanity's focus upward, away from the messiness of the ground. Stepping back from the intense heat of these terrestrial controversies, we find his ultimate synthesizing philosophy. He has codified this worldview into a framework he calls the cosmic perspective, outlined most clearly in his 2022 book, Starry Messenger. It is his attempt to apply the rigorous logic of astrophysics to the chaotic systems of human civilization. He posits that human society is currently navigating an escalating conflict between 3 distinct types of truths. First, there are objective truths, facts established by rigorous, repeatable evidence. They remain true regardless of human emotion. The speed of light in a vacuum is exactly 299,792 kilometers per second. The Earth orbits the Sun. These are non-negotiable realities. Second, there are personal truths. These are concepts you believe without requiring objective empirical evidence. Religious faith, personal morality, spiritual convictions. While they hold profound psychological power and validity for the individual, they cannot be empirically proven or forced upon others. And finally, the third and most dangerous category, political truths. He defines these as fabrications, ideologies, or propaganda, repeated incessantly through media and indoctrination until a large group of people accepts them as absolute fact, despite a complete, demonstrable lack of objective evidence. The core thesis of the cosmic perspective is a stark warning. Every time a civilization allows personal truths or political truths to override, suppress, or legislate against objective truth, that civilization inevitably suffers, stagnates, or collapses. He applies this militant demand for objective truth to absolutely everything, even the topics the public desperately wants to romanticize, like UFOs. As the world's most famous astrophysicist, he is bombarded with questions about alien visitation. People want him to validate their blurry, monochromatic infrared videos of fuzzy lights in the sky. His response is a masterclass in the scientific burden of proof. He famously uses the hypothetical scenario of an alien abduction. He tells audiences, if you are abducted by aliens and experimented on inside a flying saucer, do not just come back and tell me a story. Human perception is deeply flawed. You need to steal something from the spaceship. Grab an instrument off the wall. Better yet, wait for the alien janitor to look away and steal the alien ashtray. If you bring back a physical object, a laboratory can analyze it. They can examine the materials for isotopic anomalies or elements that do not exist on our periodic table. They can definitively prove its extraterrestrial origin. But without that physical evidence, it remains a mere anecdote, susceptible to the flaws of human memory. Yet, what makes this man truly fascinating is how he balances this uncompromising rationalism with a deep, tangible appreciation for the sensory human experience. He does not live his life like a cold, calculating robot. He lives in Lower Manhattan with his wife, Alice, whom he originally met in a graduate physics class at the University of Texas. They are massive foodies. He is a recognized wine connoisseur, but he doesn't just drink the wine. He uses his deep knowledge of chemistry, fluid dynamics, and olfactory biology to understand precisely how different vintages interact with oxygen and the exact optimal temperatures required to maximize the sensory experience. He is an obsessive calligraphy nerd. In a fascinating interview with the New York Times, he detailed his personal mathematical theory of fountain pens. He stated that you can mathematically determine if a pen is perfectly calibrated for calligraphy if the capillary action of the nib forces you to dip it into the inkwell after exactly 8 to 10 words. This specific mechanical limitation, he argues, creates a beautiful, natural, rhythmic pause in the writer's thought process. He is constantly searching for the underlying mathematical rhythm that governs aesthetic beauty. And my absolute favorite quirk regarding his earthly habits? He measures the length of audiobooks, several of which he has narrated himself in that booming, theatrical planetarium voice, by a very specific sociological metric: how many mornings in Los Angeles traffic it takes to listen to them. A 10-hour book isn't 10 hours. It is a 4-morning commute book. All of these elements, the humor, the wine, the calligraphy, the relentless demand for evidence, the brutal controversies, coalesce into his ultimate goal: to dramatically humble human hubris. He frequently references the famous pale blue dot photograph taken by the Voyager 1 space probe. in 1990 as it was leaving our solar system, captured at the direct request of Carl Sagan. In that image, Earth is nothing more than a single microscopic pixel of light suspended in a sunbeam against the vast, crushing darkness of the void. When you view humanity from a distance of 4 billion miles, the artificial boundaries we construct entirely vanish. Our geopolitical wars over imaginary lines drawn in the dirt, our violent racial divides based on minute variations in skin melanin, our toxic political tribalism. It all looks utterly, tragically absurd when you comprehend the objective reality that the heavy elements in your bloodstream, the iron in your hemoglobin, the calcium in your bones, were literally forged in the superheated cores of dying, collapsing stars billions of years ago. It fundamentally rewires how you interact with your fellow humans. Science literacy is not just about memorizing the periodic table. He explicitly defines it as a vaccine against charlatans who would exploit your ignorance. In an era flooded with digital misinformation, deepfakes, and algorithmic propaganda, the scientific method is a tool for survival. We have watched a young man from the Bronx navigate the heavy social tax of racial prejudice. We witnessed him shatter the physical stereotype of the academic, utilizing the kinetic physics of Latin ballroom dancing to win a gold medal. We saw him unflinchingly demote Pluto and force billionaires to redraw the sky. And we critically navigated the intensely dark friction of his public life. The battles with philosophers, the clashes with fundamentalists, and the severe allegations that forever complicate his legacy. Through every controversy and triumph, his relentless focus has remained on fighting for a more scientifically literate civilization. He constantly reminds us that the universe is unimaginably vast, violent, and beautiful, and our time existing within it is vanishingly short. He famously asserts that we are, quite literally, stardust brought to life, empowered by the universe to figure itself out. We are the cosmos made conscious. So, I leave you with a question that demands we look up from the glowing screens in our hands and stare into the overwhelming reality of the night sky. Are you utilizing your brief, fleeting moment of consciousness to actually figure out the universe around you? Or are you squandering that miraculous statistical anomaly by fighting over the petty, localized political truths that he so desperately warns us about? If this exploration shifted your perspective today, or challenged your assumptions about the friction between science and society, do not keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, subscribe to Legendary Lives Unveiled, and share this audio journey with someone who needs a heavy dose of objective reality. And remember, the very next time you find yourself in a crowded, noisy club, and you see a dancer spinning wildly across the floor with a flaming piece of wardrobe, pay close attention. Do not dismiss them, because you never know. That guy might just be calculating the orbital mechanics of a dwarf planet in his head, preparing to rewrite our understanding of the entire solar system. Keep looking up, and we will see you next time.